is the memory in our subconscious of the way our body configured itself physiologically in the moment in order for us to survive. And we did survive. And so that physiological configuration gets stored as, oh, that it worked. I survived. Okay, the next time that comes up, I know what to do. It's a coping mechanism, right?
1, 2, 3, 4.
Hi, welcome to Life and Leadership Unfiltered. Today's topic will be self, capital S. My guest today is educated as a biologist and a technical engineer. In his current profession as a coach, Richard helps clients develop and maintain their mental calm in the face of ongoing challenges and complexity. But he does this in an unusual way by integrating his coaching with internal family systems. While he is not a therapist, Richard is deeply attuned to the very real problems of childhood trauma and distress, problems that bewilder many outwardly successful entrepreneurs and executives. He is a husband, a father, and a man who has committed himself to overcoming relationships, including his own. I met Richard at the Institute of Coaching. I was curious about internal family systems, otherwise known as IFS. So we got together for a chat. It was a surprise to both of us that our informal chat morphed into a conversation worthy of the Life and Leadership Unfiltered podcast. Please be aware that for purposes of confidentiality and brevity, this has been edited somewhat from the original. So without further ado, I'd like to share with you my conversation with Richard, Tashma, about internal family systems, self, and coaching. Enjoy.
It's so cool to meet you again and actually have a little time to exchange ideas and see what comes up or comes forth.
Yeah. Well, thank you for meeting with me also.
Totally.
So you are really quite articulate and just really powerful. I was really impressed by I was
Thank
reading.
you. I went to a great high school where we had some just spectacular teachers, and particularly in the English department. And I took AP English, advanced placement English, and the guy who taught AP English was great. Mr. Archer was great. He could easily have been a PhD if he wanted to, and he just really, this was after years of already learning, but he really taught us to appreciate the language. And I've gone on to continue to do that. And then with my coaching work, I've recognized the power of words, right? And the importance of being accurate.
Well, yes, to some extent. The reason I say that, it's so powerful. Language has its influence, has experience. Words have different meaning for all of us. That's why I say can be not so accurate, because when you mean something, somebody else takes it a different way.
Totally.
So that's why I said yes to some extent, but there is power in being accurate and having the language bank, right? To be able to paint the picture with words. And I really admire that. And that's why I noticed I'm like, wow, he's really well read.
Thank you.
I didn't know what you call that. A great writer, I guess.
Thank you.
The reason why I appreciate the language so much is that it's oftentimes the most challenging for me. And I thought about, I thought about like, where did this come from? Why do I have such a difficulty expressing myself? And especially when I'm nervous, I end up forgetting. I remember one time, Richard, that I was so nervous, I forgot my name. And I had to ask people, like, what's my name? So nervousness really interferes with my ability to communicate and even write under pressure. That was, of course, a long time ago. And so that's where my admiration comes from.
Interesting. Well, thank you for sharing that. And thank you
Sure.
for the acknowledgement also, by the way. And I'm thinking the beauty of helping people find their the pathway of their journey is already it already exists within us, right? We don't know for all of the tracks or treks that might exist inside us. We're not sure exactly which one is the one that is optimum or that we're supposed to be traveling. And so it's tricky to find, it can be tricky. So,
Sure. It's called LIFE.
what inspires you to reach out, to connect? Are you, I know that you're interested in IFS, and in what dimension, for yourself, for people you work with, for the world?
Yeah. Well, one, the purpose of I reach out to you is because when you spoke about IFS is really, really interesting. Someone who it sounds like to me that you really have took a lot of your energy and attention,
Yeah.
mastering that area. And I have such admiration for people that dedicate themselves to mastering an area, and hopes that I can also learn from you. And it's just about getting to know you, and
Okay.
more so than that in the big context that it's harder to get to know someone.
Cool.
And who knows? You never know what happens later
Right.
on.
Okay. Marvelous. I'm well known for being the kind of person who people feel comfortable sharing themselves with. And it's just, believe me, it did not come automatically. I've been on this journey for 40 years.
Mm.
I'm going to be 66 next month.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm also an only child. I have a half sister who's 11 years older than I am, whom I have a delightful relationship with, but I didn't even know she existed until before I was 9. And I've only seen her. She lives in Florida. I've only seen her in person like 4 or 5 times in my life. Although she's a real sweet person, and we talk a couple times a year. She calls me on my birthday. I call her on her birthday. We have a great time. So that part's fun. But other than that, I was born and raised an only child. And for people who are only children, we see the world differently from people who have active siblings around. And my wife has a brother who's a bit younger than she is. And our daughter, as it turns out, is an only child. And she's 26, almost 27. And when she was little and we had decided that, okay, I think this is going to be our only kid, I said to Linda, it's different. And she knew I'm an only child. It's very obvious to her. But I said, it's different raising an only child from raising siblings. And she couldn't comprehend it. But now that our daughter is adult and all these years later, she's like, yeah, she's bloody just like you. And, well, okay, that's... Sorry, but don't be surprised. I tried to warn you, you know? So anyway, yeah, that's something else I can relate to. But when I was in my mid-20s, I already graduated from university. I had a small business. It was a technical field service business, hands-on mechanical work. And I had a couple of people working for me and stuff. And we were good at what we did, and we were well regarded in our market. But I was miserable as a person, not because I was, like massively successful and didn't know what to do with it. I just hated the person I had become. Really incompetent in relationships, so much so, and I was so lonely. And I thought at some point, as I was descending into that abyss, I thought, I can't do this. I've got to do something else. Because my parents loved me. They didn't know how to parent me all that well, but I knew that they loved me like they loved to breathe. And I thought, I cannot do this to my family. I have got to change. It's got to be me. I've got to change. And so I started on that journey, and it's a long and really circuitous story, but it brought me here over four plus decades. And I found IFS about 8 years ago, close to 8 years now. And I was already in this domain because I had left my life as a technical engineer. I had my skills were really well regarded at one point, but then because I was in computing, my skills had become obsolete. So I thought, I don't want to start over again. I want to do something else. And that, again, brought me here. And when I found IFS, I thought, this really works for me. It's it's systems oriented, which I am, and it aligns with my idea of how the psyche works, which is that we have these elements within us that we're referencing all the time, and we call them parts. It's just there's a part of me that wants to have pizza, and there's a part of me that wants to wants to have fish instead of pizza or something like that. Right? And there's a part of me, I'll tell you what, there's a part of me that was really excited to get on this call with you, and enthusiastic and excited. And the more I learned about that, and the more I saw that in myself, and the more I got to know these parts, the more I love my own life, Charlie. It's so cool.
That sounds very cool.
And, from a biology and neurology perspective, to me anyway, it only makes sense. It's how the world is organized around us. We are relational beings.
Right.
Right? I mean, it's like, that's no secret. So why wouldn't the design, why wouldn't the architecture, is what I meant to say, why wouldn't the architecture of our psyche line up with, match, mirror, whatever, be similar to, at least, the way the outside world is for us, in which we are embedded? The whole context in which we live is people with whom we're in relationship. Well, why wouldn't our psyche be organized the same way internally? Nature likes to not waste a bunch of excess energy. So it made sense.
Good job in being efficient, right?
Yeah, it made sense to me. So anyway, that when I found it, I got really jazzed, and I found that it absolutely works. And the way it's evolved over 40 years, IFS I'm talking about. I don't know if you watched the video, of course, that's how you commented on it. That's part of the reason we came together. This is the 40th year celebration of IFS. It was originally Dick Schwartz came up with the idea in 1983. So it's been demonstrated over decades that it produces spectacular results for people. So
what's the aim? What's the reason? What is the aim for IFS?
Ultimately, really, the aim at its essence is the idea that it's emergent. Let's put it that way. I'll say it like this. I always try to figure out a little different way or a little better way to say it. It's emergent from the idea, the principle, that we are at our core, from a more spiritual or religious sense, our source, we are connected to the universe because we're energy, right? And we're connected to everything around us, and all the living things around us particularly, but also even the inanimate things around us. And I'm not trying to be woo-woo about it. I'm just saying it is energy. And so the energy that animates me is also connected to the energy of the universe in which I exist. Mm-hmm. That seems like a reasonable conclusion.
So knowing that's the aim, is to introduce people.
Well, let me develop it just one more step. Yes, you're on the right track, but I stopped before I should have. So let me finish the idea that this energy that animates us also carries the wisdom of the ages with it, and we're born with it, and it's pure, and it understands leadership at its essence. It is wise, and, or as some people say, sage. It's wise, and it understands the context in which we exist, and it understands the flow of time and history and all that stuff. So in IFS, because of the way the language of IFS developed, and I can explain that in a moment, we refer to that as self with a capital S instead of little s, self. And so in IFS, the essence of it is the idea that all of that, a harmonious system, a well organized and harmonious system, psyche system, is self-led, led by this internal core wisdom that we refer to as self with a capital S, and that all the parts around it are active in the system doing what they do, because all the parts have roles, and they're doing it with the appropriate respect to self leadership, to self as the leader of the system. That's what makes IFS different from basically every other therapeutic model, is that it's like all the parts orbit and serve valuable roles and are all led by this self energy. And the work of IFS is to honor that structure or architecture, and B, for those parts that are carrying distress or loss or tragedy or I think I said distress, whatever those things are, which I can also explain in more depth, in more detail, that carry those energies of trouble, and the parts that manage those energies of trouble, which those are two different classes of parts that we think of in IFS, that when all of that distressed energy is properly resolved, resolved, the parts will naturally return to they will return to their naturally valuable state and their naturally valuable roles, and they will naturally come back into harmony with self. That's the work.
Homeostasis.
You could call it that, yes. Although the reason I don't usually use the word homeostasis is because homeostasis usually implies something that's approximately static, not rigid, but kind of limit. It operates in a narrow range, right, like a thermostat. Whereas, in fact, one of the words I learned from Lisa Feldman Barrett, who you may or may not have heard of, she's a neuroscientist who has she was originally a therapist and a psychologist and became a neuroscientist, and her research subject is emotion. She uses a word she has become synonymous, I think, with a word that was developed by somebody else a couple, 2 or 3 decades ago, called allostasis, which has more to do with being predictive than staying within narrow boundaries of homeostasis.
I see.
And so our system is very dynamic. but it's also very predictive because that's how our nervous system is organized to work, is to predict our brain is doing this like 50 times a second, right?
Sure.
Our brain is predicting what's going to happen next or what could happen next.
Right.
And it's making parallel predictions. And then it's looking for data coming in from our sensory from all of our sensory data. It's looking for matches to see which sensory data aligns best with which prospective figuration of our physiology. And so there's this feedback loop that's going on from our brain to our body and coming back up to our brain and picking up information from the environment and all that stuff. And so our system is highly dynamic. And that's why Lisa uses this word allostatic as opposed to homeostatic. Yes, the temperature of our body is, we have a homeostatic mechanism to maintain our internal body temperature, but our system as a whole is more allostatic, I think. Does that make sense?
Yeah, very interesting. You've completely expanded.
This is why
view of things.
Why I record these things, because when I get together with people, the person I'm talking to always inspires the dialogue differently, and so I'm like, that was kind of cool how I said it that time.
Yes.
Thank you.
Very cool. I appreciate that. So, to hone it down so that I have a better understanding, because you gave me a picture, right? Because to me, it's still abstract because I'm one of those people that can't get hints. It's just like, I need it really concrete.
Sure.
So, for example, if I was working on my trigger, right, that causes me, obviously it triggers me, right? It gets me out of sort. It creates suffering.
So tell me a little bit more, please, about when you get triggered, what changes do you notice? Describe that a little bit.
When I get triggered, I get very upset. Some triggers are better than others, more fierce than others. And depending who it is, some obviously manageable. This is sort of like my self-regulation this year, my theme for self-regulation. I'm always like really just conscious of my triggers and what to do about it. And so in certain relationships, I perceive things to be like, wow, now I'm feeling unwelcome because of what you said. I have my own, that accurate communication. Somebody tells me something, I'm translating it to be different. They didn't mean it. Here I am triggered. And so then I feel a sense of hurt, injustice, I suppose. Yeah. And so I'm like, my mind gets like, why did you say that? Because what you said made me feel, why did you say that?
Okay. Yep. So when something like that happens, it sounds like there's a part of you that has a sensitivity to those types of stimuli, input, whether it's I'm thinking whether it's a facial, a body expression presentation, or something that a person says, or the way they say it, or it can be very nuanced, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And there's a part of you that's like got its antenna up to these things. Good. Okay. And if I've followed you also correctly, I think you said that you tend to feel that in your body more like in your shoulders and maybe your upper chest. Was I accurate, or was it more
heart,
here? Got it.
My heart starts to, and then my head starts to get hot. Oh. So my heart and head I start to feel hot.
Okay, cool. I mean, great. Thank you. Cool. Thank you that's great information. So if you're willing, and you may be intellectually willing, but when I say that, I'm also indirectly checking with your system. I'm also speaking to your system and asking for your system's agreement and willingness to take a closer look at the part that is responding or reacting in that way. And if your system is willing, then please take a moment. You might want to take a breath or whatever works for you, and bring your attention to that place in your body, and notice if you feel that energy, maybe a little bit, does not need to be intense. Feel that energy of that reactivity at this time. Do you notice that?
Yeah, I feel that nervousness a little bit in my heart.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So when you bring your attention and your focus to that place in your body or that part of you, this is an important question, and we ask this a bunch in IFS. How do you feel toward it? It's an unusual question. How do you feel toward it?
My first initial was like, again. And
Okay.
but it's a little judgy.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So,
So let me step in here for a moment. And that's beautiful. Thank you. And I'll step in and explain that judgy response, that's another part. And that part also has its role, and it has its purpose. And that part, if it would be willing, in this context, in this conversation, at this time, does not, the part I'm speaking indirectly to through you to the part, that part does not need, this is not a request for the part to go away. And it's also not a request for the part to give up its role. And for the purposes of this conversation for the next few minutes, ask that part whether it would be willing to engage with you in an exploration and give you a little elbow room, step to the side a little bit and give you the opportunity to get to know this part that holds that reservation or maybe fear, perhaps. Get to know that part a little bit more. So ask the judgy part if it's willing to make a little space for you to get to know this other part.
okay.
And don't think of an answer, just wait for it to answer you.
Feels silent.
Do you sense that it's given you some space?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, beautiful. So we'll go back to the prior question then. You're doing beautifully, Kudos to your system for trusting this process and for trusting you for that matter. When you bring your attention and your focus back to this place in your body where that reactivity or that fear, that may not be the appropriate term for it, so correct me if it's not a good word for it. When you bring your attention back there, how do you feel toward it now?
Well, the word is really nervousness.
Okay, nervousness. Okay.
Yeah.
So when you bring your attention to the nervousness part, right? And how do you feel toward it now?
I guess acceptance.
Nice. You notice the difference in the response when you say acceptance? And does that, it doesn't have to, but does that perchance elicit any kind of different somatic, different kind of feeling in your body when you describe your relationship right now to that nervousness part as being acceptance? Do you notice any difference?
Doesn't feel as feeling nervousness or anxiety feeling. It doesn't as much.
Okay.
Kind of lightning. It's there's some levity to it.
Beautiful. So I will share with you, this is beautiful. I will share with you, Charlene, that what we've just done here in these last few minutes then is the very beginning. We're scratching the surface here, but this is the beginning of what an IFS experience is like. So I'll take a couple of minutes here and we can continue to do some more work, but I want to make sure that I'm mindful of the clock. So let me, if you will, explain a little bit about what we've just done, deconstruct it a little bit for you, okay?
Sure.
Without going too deep into the mechanics of it. The nervousness part, we don't know yet which class part it is. Parts come in two broad, well, from an IFS point of view, the parts that are carrying distress or trauma or tribulation, the challenging energies, okay? They come in two broad classes. Then there's a whole mess of other parts in our system that they just cause our lives to function. They know how to turn on the lights and brush our teeth and turn on the computer and get on a Zoom call. Those parts, they just know their stuff and they do it. Those are like administrative parts, right? They're just doers. And that's what most of our parts are. Because we've got an unknown number of parts. Most of them they're just doing stuff that needs to get done. And they're not carrying any of these troublesome, or in more precise terminology, what we think of as burdensome energies. Okay. When we're faced, especially when we're little, particularly when it's not always, but particularly when we're before we're 10, typically, and we're faced with significant challenges that are like threats to us, because we know that if we aren't properly connected to our environment and our caregivers, we're going to die, right? Our system knows that. We know that from birth. It's just in our biology. And so we naturally, when we're faced with challenges of any number of sorts, some of them might seem very benign on the surface, but to us, they're very significant. And others are really, truly life-threatening, right? It's a whole range. But to us, they're kind of whatever level of challenge it is, if we don't know any better way to deal with it, we do whatever we can to survive and we suck it up, right? The energy of that, the fright or the fear or the nervousness or the reactive energy, whatever that is of the situation, we got to do something with that physiological configuration if we're going to survive. And so we suck it up, we store it in our body. And we got to put it someplace. Now, in my personal opinion, our body will eventually relax. But what does get stored long term for us is the memory in our subconscious of the way our body configured itself physiologically in the moment in order for us to survive. And we did survive. And so that physiological configuration gets stored as, oh, that it worked. I survived. Okay, the next time that comes up, I know what to do. It's a coping mechanism, right? But as we grow and we get older and we get more mature and we have more skills and we're bigger and we can defend ourselves and all this other stuff, we still have those same coping skill configurations stored in our subconscious. And when those triggers, those stimuli happen, it's like a lock and a key, right? Because our brains are pattern matching machines. So we scan for a pattern. How have I responded to this before? Oh, I've responded like this before. Should work now, right? So our brain reconfigures our physiology in the moment, and we feel that in our. I mean, it's it really, we feel it genuinely because our brain reconfigures our physiology in the moment to be like that.
That's a pretty spectacular machine that we have.
It's incredible. It's awesome. The problem is that coping mechanism is outdated. It doesn't serve us anymore.
Right.
But this part of our psyche has become bound to that reactive physiological configuration and reactivity.
it just makes me think about how I often say, is this a habit or intuition? Your reactive patterns, right? Is this a bad habit? Not just regular habit, but is it really intuition?
You looking for me to answer that? I haven't.
Well, I often share that with people. It just occurred to me that it seems similar to what you're saying in a different, seems similar,
Okay.
but just worded different.
My thought in response to that prompt is it depends on whether we have an injury or a wound around that is linked to that stimuli. And when we can relieve the more or less automatic response, and we can actually look more deeply within ourselves, back to our core self energy, that's when we can really connect with the intuition. Because our self has the perspective, the broad perspective that we're really looking for intuitively. Because our self cannot be wounded. That's the cool part of self. It cannot be harmed. It cannot be broken. It cannot be wounded, because it's our connection to the universe.
Wow, that's a lot to chew on. You're making like bold statements right here. Wow, it's amazing. It's great. It's an amazing, great concept, but boy, I'm having a hard time chewing on it.
It's because when we try to intellectualize it, it becomes very difficult when we try to intellectualize it.
Say again.
It about the self being this core wisdom that connects us to the universe and the natural intelligence. I don't mean intellect, but the knowingness of the universe that is where our intuition really originates from. Yeah. And so the more we can do to bring all of the parts into alignment with self and harmony within the system, the more likely we are to be able to pick up signals that self is bringing forth about intuitive ideas, about intuitive paths or solutions.
It's pretty powerful stuff for sure.
It is.
I also view self as seeking experience. Seeking experience. We're driven, more knowledge, experience. As humans, I believe we're all experiential. We want to experience situation, relationships optimally. Right? Memories, making great memories, that kind of thing. How is that coming from self?
When I look in my system for an answer to a response to that question, which is a great question, it's perfectly legitimate. The answer that's coming up for me is that the memories and thoughts are carried by parts.
Memories and thoughts are carried
by parts. Parts which, for me, in my system, are not burdened or wounded or reactive. They're helper parts. They're doing the job that they do, which is to help carry memories. Like, it could be the memory of my late parents, or it could be the memory of where did I leave my keys last.
What about painful memories?
Not all. Let's see, how do I want to say this? In my way of seeing it for myself in my system, I have plenty of memories that are sad. The untimely death of a very, very close friend 20 odd years ago, who died in his early 30s of a circulatory failure. He had an aneurysm in it, and it killed him. Long story, but that's the short version of it. And this guy, next to my wife, this guy was one of the most important people in my life. and he died suddenly. And it was hugely traumatic for me. And even now, when I think about him and how much he mattered to me, I still have a somatic response to it 20 odd years later. And if I think about it enough, I'll start crying. So I've got a part in me that carries the memory that I have for Rob. That was his name, Rob. And all of the energy and the love that I had for him, and the battles that we worked together for years. You know, and the battles that we had, and the triumphs that we had, and the times we were battling each other, and the times we were doing things together and it was triumphant and stuff like that. All of those, there's one or more parts in me that are holding on to those memories, and I care about those memories because I want to be able to call them up again and re-experience them. I don't want to shut them out. I want to be able to live them again. I want to be able to bring them into my body because I love him and I love his memory and I want to honor him. And in fact, he's part of the reason I'm even doing this work as a coach. It was a very strange, it was a very bizarre relationship that we had.
The dynamic relationship.
Very. We worked together for years, and it really was a very dynamic and very bizarre relationship. But we really loved each other a lot. And he was also an only child. It was another thing that made it work. So that's part of the answer to your question, I think. And again, because of those restrictions of time, I want to make sure I get this one detail in, that the parts that carry the unhappiness or the nervousness or the reactivity, as I said, they come in two broad classes. And for one are the parts that really carry that burdensome experience. And then there's another class, and we refer to those as exiled parts, because they're kind of like pushed out of they're pushed into a corner of the system. It's what a lot of times when we think of shadow work, that's what we're talking about, is like the parts that are in the shadows. And then there are the other parts. There's a whole other class of parts that we refer to as protector parts. And the purpose for protectors is to protect the system from being overwhelmed. And it does that not because it's brilliant, but it doesn't know any better. Those parts do that by keeping the burdened, exiled parts locked up. And the work of IFS is to get to know first, very important, the protector parts. So the part that we met in your system that was judgy, that's a protector part. And the part that the nervous part, I'm sorry, I may be using the wrong word. You'd given me the word before, and I'm trying to.
That's the word.
The nervous part might be a protector protecting another exile. It's possible. We don't know yet. We haven't checked in far enough. Or it could actually be an exile part. If I had to guess, I'd say it's probably a protector part, because the protector parts, when they've done, these parts work their butts off all the time. They're on high alert all the time. And so we always have to honor the protectors before we can go to the exiles. The wounding is usually held by the exile. Sometimes the protectors can have their own burdens too. That's a whole other story. So this is not linear. It's not mechanical and linear. It's very dynamic and very interconnected. But that's the work of IFS, is knowing how to suss all this out and how to interact with the parts. The beauty of it is when you said acceptance, that was the beginning of a measure of you coming from self with a little bit of compassion. I will suggest that term when you said acceptance, a little bit of compassion for this part. That's what we're looking for. That's an essential step in the process. So now I've given you a very, like superficial, but fairly comprehensive experience of what a little bit of IFS is like.
Well, thank you. I know for the time, and thank you for being so timely.
Sure.
I really appreciate this introduction. it sounds like, yes, we just kind of like scratch and sniff the surface.
Very much. Yeah.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. It's you said some really powerful things that are pretty amazing, that I have a lot to think about. And thank you, Richard.
Oh, it's awesome. This is great. I'm so thrilled.
I'm so thrilled too, like serendipity. Just
Yeah. Thanks,
Sounds-
Charlene. Have a marvelous afternoon. Blessings to you.
You
Bye-bye.
too. Bye bye.